My name is Era, and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tamil Creator. I'm your host, Era, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Geetha Moorthy, and she is the executive director of the SAAAC Autism Center in Toronto. And I know a lot of you listening know what SAAAC does, and we had a previous guest, Jalaja, who actually works at SAAAC as well. So, Geetha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ara. Thanks for your time. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's an honor to have you here. So, Geetha, I love to always start at the beginning. I feel like how kind of the things you experience or the choices that were made for you or that you made in your younger formative years really kind of helps play a part of like who you become today. So maybe tell us a bit about like how you grew up, your experiences, and maybe how that eventually led you to thinking about starting something like SAAAC.
What I would say is I think my parents are my influences. Whatever they had done when we were growing up, like when I was growing up, and anybody who come to our house or, like whoever needs the help, they were always there for them kind of. So I think I grew in that environment, and I think that's what it made me where I am today. But along the path too, there are other things like which would have been like, like how you always want to become somebody when you were little, like you always want to become I don't know whether I wanted to become a doctor, but that was an influence by my parents too. But that never happened. But helping anybody, those who need it, I think that came from my parents.
Yeah, and I think I read somewhere, I think it was you got married in Sri Lanka, and then within a couple of days, because of obviously like the civil war and just kind of tensions, you had to leave like within a few days of getting married, and you came straight to Canada, or did you have to go through somewhere else?
That's correct. No, I came. So it was in August 10th, 1983. I got married, and I think we left the country on the 13th of August, and we landed here. And yeah, it was you had to live with another new person in your life, and it's a new country. But I came with my rest of my families too, and we landed in Montreal. I got a job within 2 weeks, but it was like as a bookkeeper because I'm in the accounting field. So, and it was like it's like $4 an hour, and that was the first thing. Like like okay, we are here. Everything is an unknown fact, but yes, yeah.
I feel like a lot of, like I think myself included, when we first came to Canada, even though we're in Toronto now, I feel like the first landing spot for a lot of Tamils was Montreal, whether they stayed there or came. Do you know why that was, or just out of curiosity? I don't even remember, so I'm just curious.
For me, my sister was there in Montreal. So she was in Montreal. She was living in Montreal before we came to Montreal because her husband had a job there. And so that's the reason we picked to come to Canada. But Montreal was the only place. Maybe it was like the immigration wise. Not too sure.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious about that time because I obviously came here when I was super young, but I have no memory. And I feel like the environment now, which is like immigration isn't as, I wouldn't say as welcome, but like there's definitely a different view versus I think back then when we all came. I feel like there was more of a welcoming arms for immigrants, especially ones that came from the situation that we came from. So I was just trying to see if you remembered anything from that time.
Not really.
And then, like you said, you became a bookkeeper. You were doing that for a little while, and then while you were doing this as well, I think dance was always been one of your passions, and you created something called, and I didn't know this until obviously I was digging into it a bit further.
It's a Nathanalia.
Center for
Center for South Asian Dances.
Dance.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
So, what made you start that, and like, what was the impact of this organization?
So we were in Montreal for a year, and I had my first child when I was there, the first year. And then it's because of the language barriers too, because, like the job I got was like with the French speaking owners, right? And then I felt like I'm not understanding whatever they are saying, right? And especially when you're coming from Sri Lanka, especially like even English too, like it was our second language, like because I studied everything in Tamil until in advanced level, like like we had a little bit of introducing the subjects in English, and then I was doing my Institute of Cost and Management Accountants, which is the course like we were following from England, like it's a correspondence thing, and that's all we had. And we're coming here and it's a totally a new language, and I see they all speak in French and I couldn't understand what was going on. I'm like, let's move to Toronto. And when we moved to Toronto, like I had my parents with me, and I had other siblings who moved out and then they were on their own. But then you have to have, like, I have a child, my husband, my parents. We lived in Tuxedo Court at that time when we came here, and had a job, but I don't think that was enough to like take care of the whole family. And I know, like, my husband was working too, but that wasn't enough. So I thought, okay, this is my passion. Dance is my passion. And I have done that from since I was 5 years old. I learned from when I was 5 years old. I did two different styles in dance, Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi. So I'm like, okay, why don't I? But my passion was to dance and choreograph, but not to teach, right? But I think I was kind of in a situation where you had to jump in and you need money to live, right? So like I'm like, okay, why don't I start teach dancing? And that's how Nathanalia, the South Asian Center for South Asian Dance, started. So yeah, it happened because of the circumstances too.
Like, how many dancers did you end up teaching? Like, how many people went through this center?
I would say about, so I started in 1985. I had a dance program, and the very first dance show I had was I was performing because, as I said, I like to dance and choreograph. Was for CAFTA, which is in Sri Lanka, displaced families in Sri Lanka. So that's how it started. And then because a lot of people came to see the program, and then they really loved it, and they're like, can you start teaching? And I'm like, okay, like, why don't I do it? And then I remember at Tuxedo Court, like seventh floor, I think we were on, and I was teaching. And then like you see like who are on the sixth floor always, like like too much of noise there, kind of a thing. But then like, and then I found a school facility to teach. I went from one student, and I went, I think, up to about, at one every part, like every year I had about 150 students I was teaching. Maybe I had gone through about 500, 600 students. I had about 60 arangetums and a lot of shows we did for charities.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know that while you were doing the center as well, is when you started to have an awareness and inkling of, wanting to do something in the field of autism and help those like who directly deal with it, but also parents that might have kids that also have autism as well. Because I know that was kind of where the early spark came for SAAAC. Was that correct, or is it something else?
That's correct. Like I only saw one kid who used to come for the classes, and then the mom used to come and tell me always, "Can you teach her, like individually, like not with the other kids?" And also, I also noticed she was not going with any other kids. She's not socializing. She will only come and sit right next to me. And some of my senior students would started teaching too at that point of time. But then she was always like wanted me to teach, or I have to be right next to her. But I didn't understand at that point of time because I didn't even know about autism at that time. To tell you the truth, I didn't have any clue. But then the very one of the shows we did for Mookie Balm Treatment Center, which is called Aptus now. And through my financial, like background and all those things, we used to go out for lunch with that team. And they asked me, what else do you do? And I said, oh, like I do dancing. And they go, like, can you do a fundraiser for us? And I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like, because that was my passion too. Every time when we started, and especially when we have come to Canada, and my whole thing was to give back to the community. We were not accepted in our own country. And like wherever we got accepted, I think we have to do something. So I always taught my students, like, like do something for the community, not just for you, right? So, like we were doing a lot of fundraising, including Sick Kids Hospital, um, Children Wish Foundation, and all the other stuff. So when I met with this group of people, Mookie Balm Treatment Center, when they asked me, I'm like, definitely we'll do something. So when we were doing the fundraiser show that night or the previous night when we were having rehearsals, I saw many children on the spectrum and they were there. And then I was listening to them and then they were saying like, like, oh, tomorrow at this time I had to be here. So they kept on repeating it. So then I asked like, like, okay, because I knew that this organization had children and adults on multiple disabilities. So they said, oh, these are the children who has autism. They repeat everything or they have socializing thing. So, and they have to be all like systematically, everything has to be done. They have to schedule everything ahead of time. So I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, I haven't seen anybody. That's when it clicked me that one child, like, who the mom was saying it had that child had just like similar, like, things like, like what these guys had, the other kids had.
This episode is sponsored by nobody. That's right, nobody. So if you could be kind enough to hit that subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me.
At that point in time, I'm like, maybe I should do something. And I started actually volunteering with that organization. And I said, I can teach dance for them, right? At that time, I didn't even have anything like for me to start something, right? Because I have no clue anything about autism. I don't know anything about in that field, right? I'm not a professional in that field. So I thought, okay, why don't I start teaching dance? And they said, yeah, they really welcomed me. So I was teaching dance. And then I thought, okay, this is going good. And one of the doctors who came from Sri Lanka met with me. And then he said, so because of this, I've been doing a lot of TV shows, like, like to outreach about the program, what we were doing for this thing. And so when he asked about who is like, like his niece or someone had autism, and then he wanted to reach out to someone, the Omni Television gave my number. And then, so I was talking to them and I'm like, no, I was just doing fundraising for them. But he was talking to me and he goes, Geetha, why don't you start something? Because it's, you're in the community and I think the community needs something. And I'm like, but I don't have any qualifications. I don't have any background in this field. And he goes, no, but I can see you have the passion. So I'm like, okay, let me follow my passion. So we had a very first workshop with the doctor who came from Sri Lanka. And then that workshop, about 12 families showed up. And the 12 families are like, okay, you had the workshop, now what's next? And I'm like, you can come to my house. I can teach dance. I can teach basic English and math, because these are all teenagers, but they never had any therapies or treatment because they also didn't know anything about it. You know how in our community, when you're 6 years old, 7 years old, some parents or they think mother will say, oh, my brother didn't start talking till they were 6, 7 years old. Or like, like it's like that's how they waited. And then they also didn't know what autism is because there is no word in Tamil for autism. It was a challenge for me. I didn't take it as a challenge, but I thought maybe I'll start helping them. So I asked them to come home. So I was teaching a couple of them in my dining room and some of them in the basement teaching them dance. And that's how it all started.
Yeah, I remember reading about you saying that in Tamil there was no word for autism. So I think language is a powerful thing. If there's no word for something, it's hard to articulate or like embody that thing, right? So that's so in that given cultural context where there was number one a stigma around autism, when people did know, they didn't understand it, so it was like this thing that was looked down upon, and number two, there's no word to describe it. How did you manage to, I guess, start getting the ball rolling with SAAAC? And like, was it called SAAAC at the beginning, or like, how did you?
Yeah, it was always called SAAAC. SAAAC means South Asian Autism Awareness Center. So when we started, and during that workshop time, and families came to my home, it's just that creating that trust between us and the families and the child as well. The child needs to trust us, like, like, okay, I can work with this person, right? So that's how it all started. And then we used to visit their homes. We used to go to their homes, like, like help them whatever the way they wanted to. Even for them, talking to somebody was a big thing at that point in time. Because when you have a child on the spectrum, other family members, and I know it, and a lot of families had told me, even for their child's birthday, no one will come. Like, like because they're like, oh, we don't know what the child is going to do. Or they don't get invited to go to their birthday parties. And they will, even some families say they will, even their own siblings, the parents' siblings will say, can you all come? But we don't want, like Ronnie to come. like, like something like that. And that's the really hurtful thing too, right? So what we did was that we used to go to their house, they were coming to our places, like, and then we created that family centered center, like, like where everybody can be open minded and talk about it and share their experiences, right? So that's how it was all there. And through word of mouth after that, like people got to know, like when they come here, they've been treated like a family. So
Is there something like what you've helped create with SAAAC? Are there any other centers in Toronto, Canada, anywhere that, like, let's start with Canada, I guess, that has a similar type setup or like the family centric nature of SAAAC?
not that I know of. Like there are other places where they have there are mainstream places, right? Like, like, but the thing is, it's only for therapy sessions or whatever it is, right? And you go to the therapy, you come back, right? But then we created something like the parents can come and sit there, talk to everybody. So I haven't seen that in Canada or in US because, like I get a lot of calls, like, from US and even from England. Like, like people call and say, we don't have one like this. Will you be able to start something? So it's always been a question there too.
So based on that, I mean, you're already doing so much amazing work here and helping so many families and probably a lot on your plate. You're probably overstretched as it is. When you hear these stories from the US and the UK and other places where there is need for similar to what you're offering here, are there plans or like do you have plans to maybe either help directly or like maybe train people of kind of, I guess, your playbook of starting something like this so that you could help families, even though you probably don't have the time or resources to do it now, but at least these individuals who need it or want to help in those areas can, almost like franchising, I guess, in a way. But
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
So what we are doing right now is because sometimes, like I know COVID happened, but then COVID also did bring in some good stuff for us to do, like virtual things too, right? So some of the families, like I know we have got one family who is in England, we are doing a virtual therapy session. Another family in France, we are doing a virtual session. The other thing, like if we are going to do franchise the way you were talking, my first thought is like, like we want to do international. We went to Kilinochie in 2019, and Kilinochie, like all the rural, like all the schools we went and visited. We spoke to all the families, but not too many of the children on the autism spectrum, but there are a lot of special needs kids out there. So that's our first thing. So we were supposed to go 3 years in a row, but because of COVID, we couldn't. But we were training the teachers virtually so that the teachers can work with the kids. So we did that for the first in 2020 and 2021. And I hope like this year, if everything goes well, maybe end of the year, we might be able to go again to help those families. So if we are doing an international, I want to do it in Jaffna, Sri Lanka first, like, like before we go anywhere else.
And with creating something like this, obviously you're doing good, but you said you need money to live and like money to run the operations, like the facilities, training, medical professionals, like the folks that work with
Mhm.
the children, but also train your volunteers. So how did you go about getting funding? Was it like government money at the beginning or was it like strictly private donors?
So at the beginning, when we started, like we had, so let's see, from starting from my home, right? Because my home it was free rent. No, no, we don't have to pay anything. But then we had few volunteers coming in, and I'm so appreciative for like, or like, like admire those volunteers, and because they are the employees right now, some of them. So at that time, for the 6 years, like everyone was volunteering. Nobody, we were not even paying anybody other than the professional therapists, like, like one or two of them we hired, and that too through fundraising. So when we had our very first gala in 2010, we raised about over $25,000. At that time, we were able to hire a part-time ABA therapist, part-time speech and language, and then part-time music therapist. And I was teaching dance. And what we did was we trained the trainers. We trained the trainers so that training the volunteers, and the volunteers will work with the families so that we don't need to have a full-time like professional in there, right? So everybody was training other than the SLPs, speech and language pathologist, everyone else was training. So it started from volunteer based organization, and we started applying for grants, but we were not getting too many grants at that point of time. So maybe about 3 years ago, I would say about 4 years ago, we got a funding for the CARES program, it's SAC CARES. That's for the caregivers because the caregivers are burnt out, like, like because it's a 24/7 for them. And so we thought, okay, we will give them some tools to how to control behaviors, or, like how they can be relaxing a little bit. Because the caregivers think that because they have a child on the spectrum, they think they can't have fun. That's a mentality, like, like I can't have fun because my son or daughter has autism, right? But we were teaching them, like, no, you can go out to movies. You can go out with your friends to have lunch or dinner. Like, like you can do all those things. And they're like, really? But what would other people say? I'm like, don't worry about other people. They're not going to come and help you. So we were trying to educate and empower our parents and how to relax, how to, like how to do things, right, in a way. So for that particular one, we got some grants from the Ontario government. And then we applied to the federal government, was giving us some funding for adults on the spectrum for their employment opportunities. So we were training them, and then we were finding employment outside of SAAC. So they go to different places like Saravanan gave them a job, like, like in another hotel gave them a job. So, like that, like we were getting that funding.
Did you know that every time you left a 5 out of 5 review for this podcast, a Tamil parent lets their child pursue a career in the creative arts? Okay, that's probably not true, but if there's a chance that it is, do you really want to jinx it? Leave a review. Do it for the young creative in you.
And right before the COVID, or right after COVID, we partnered with many mainstream organizations. So like Surrey Place, Holland Bloomfield Hospital, Kerry's Place, and like all 6 other organizations. And we applied for a bigger grant, and we got that one. So now, like, we have got few programs which are funded. So one is entry to school, which is like, like before they go to school, we get them ready to go to school, kind of a thing. And the other one is urgent response services. It's like, like when the children are having high behaviors. So, like you can, so few things we are getting funded now, which is really good. And the other one we are doing is our fee for service. So most of our services are like, like some are free, some are subsidized. Although when we say fee for service, like it's some are subsidized, right? So the program is like growing. That's why we need to get we got a second location where we can reduce our wait list. Because of COVID, like the wait list got increased too. So we want to reduce the wait list, give more therapy sessions to them. So fee for service is there. We are still doing our fundraising, and then we are getting funds too.
You talked about volunteers a bit. I mean, volunteers, I think, are the life, like one of the lifelines, the lifeblood of SAAC. And with volunteers, is obviously very hard, I think, typically for a lot of organizations to get volunteers, but also get committed volunteers that stay long term. And I think that's important for the kind of programming that you're offering as well. So, what do you think has been your secret to kind of getting volunteers, but also keeping them committed long term?
It's a secret, so I'm not going to tell you. No, it is. I think it's, how do I put that? Like, like volunteers, like at the beginning, right? Because everyone was volunteering and they were not getting paid, and they still wanted to come there. They still wanted to help the families. And those who are coming, they are coming with a passion too. So later on, what we did was we used to go to the schools, high schools, or like colleges and universities, and we go to their fair, like they have that like some kind of a fair or something. So we go there, we kind of have a booth, we talk to people, and we were bringing in to our center. And also, like, we have got our volunteer coordinator. Of course, Jalija was a volunteer coordinator at that time. And then she was like, like reaching out to the schools and her friends and the friends' friends, their friends or relatives. And that's how it was all coming together. And then word of mouth too. And when we have events like walkathon or gala, and we see a lot of people, they come there and they want to be part of the organization. So it's like, it's really good. And also, like, we get interns now from universities and colleges, because they need high schoolers, they need their hours, and others, they need their hours too. But when they come here, I have seen many volunteers wanted to be in this field. So they go to do ABA therapy or speech and language or occupational therapy. So, and then they will come back to us again, so that like an employment opportunity, kind of, right?
Interesting. And you talked about this earlier as well, or I think in one of your interviews, where it's almost very entrepreneurial, the spirit that you have, even though you're obviously having a non-profit, because you just did this thing that started organically because you saw a need, you wanted to help, and then it's kind of grown to become pretty significant. But there's that point in time, it's almost like, I'm thinking of like my business experience where I was working somewhere full time while trying to start something on the side. So there's this period of overlap where you're working a lot. So you're working full time while doing this other thing that's essentially almost full time as well. How did you manage that from like a financial energy perspective? You're also a mother as well with a family. So there's all these obligations. Like how did you manage that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think I have always been, from the time I got married till now, like I always been having like work and dance before. So dance was my like that was second job too at that time. So I'll work from 9 to 5, come home 6:30. I start dance classes, and then I'll go until 9:30. And Saturdays and Sundays I'm teaching dance too. So I was like used to that kind of a life, but in between the time, like I had to take my kids to swimming classes and music class and that and this and a lot of other things, and making sure that they are on track, like with the education, especially. But then when we started SAAAC in 2008, I was working full time. I was trying to reduce my dance school a little by little because it's impossible to handle three things at once, right? When we started the 2008, I'm like, okay, how do I manage this between the work, financial stuff, and this one, but then after work? So thanks to the volunteers again, because the volunteers we had was like they were all ready to work in the evening. We will all meet at my place and then we talk about it. And I get emails midnight, oh, we have to do this tomorrow. We had to apply for this grant. So I think because of the passionate volunteers and what I wanted to do, my dream, I think we were able to, like, it was a drive, it was like very, it's sincerely what I would say is like everyone was so passionate about what's next, kind of, and we never got tired of it, right? So it was like it was driving each other, like, okay, let's do this tomorrow, let's do that, right? So I think we had a great team working together, and that's how it happened.
Like I mentioned earlier with SAC, the impact being significant. These numbers might have changed because I know they're from like 2019 or 2020, but I think at that point you were serving about 350 families, 25 staff members, 170 trained volunteers. At that point, it was just the 11,000 square foot facility, and then you added a second one, and then you just added the third one recently with the 18,000 square feet. With the humble beginnings of just this, you just saw a need, and it started off in your house, your living room, to now like having this significant impact with like a wait list and people internationally wanting to replicate what you've helped create with your volunteers and your staff. It's been like a 14-year journey. The thing that I always think of in my mind is this saying of people overestimate what they can do in a day, but underestimate what they can do in a decade. And you kind of are an embodiment of that. So even though you've got to this point along the journey, there's always periods of doubt or even just people questioning you. Did you ever like just doubt that, what am I doing here? Is this too much? Or even externally, like, did you ever have people feeling, hey, Geetha, you're on a track for, a great, white collar professional journey. Why are you doing this? Like, did you hear any of that?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Always my even my family or my friends, they always thought that I'm a little bit cuckoo, because I'm a very adventurous person. I love challenges too. And even when we had the very first gala, right? And I planned it within a month's time. And my family and my friends looked at me and said, how are you even going to do this? And I'm like, I think I can get 500 people. Because I was like, it's like you believe in yourself and you believe in people who you're with, like they have to believe in you too. Or, whatever you do, your product or a service, it's like although this is a service, like you had to treat it as a product. If you don't believe in what you're doing, then others are not going to believe in you. So when we start, for me, it's like I don't know whether I thought that I'm not too sure like where we are going with. I wanted to help few families. And then that few families became like more families. And, now I know we want to go national, international level. What I feel is like we are still not done with our mission. Like I think we can do more. For me, it's like it has to be challenging and it has to be done like we can do a lot more than what we are doing now. So I know like when people ask me like why are you doing this, what is the purpose of doing it? I'm like, I want to do it. That's all. It's like, that's what it is. I believe in myself. I want to do it. And I'm pretty sure I can do it. So after that, nobody asked me any questions after that.
Well, I know that you do what you do for because you're trying to do good and you're trying to help others. But I think sometimes it's nice to be recognized. And I think it was June of 2019, you were awarded the Gerry Bloomfield Professional Award. Tell us about number one, like how did you even get recognized for this award? What is this award about? And what did it mean to you?
So Gerry Bloomfield Award is like because he's one of the founding member of the Autism Ontario. I think Autism Ontario was called a different name before. When he was there, he was one of the founding member. And what they were doing was like, like in recognition of like, like outstanding contribution to the Autism Ontario and autism. And that's what they were giving the awards for. And it's like the board of directors make the decision. I think they have the board of directors will come together. I think they have about 19 or 20 board of directors. They will come together and then they will pick few names, a couple of names, and then it has to be the majority will win. And what I heard was, so I got a call from the executive director and the board chair one day, and they're like, oh, have you heard about Gerry Bloomfield? I'm like, no. And they're like, okay. So they explained to me what it is. It's outstanding contribution. It can be for improving programs, or it can be like conducting research, right? And also like, or policies and stuff like that. So the three things they look into. And they said, so we have 100% of the board of directors decided on you, although we had other names too. And I'm like, wow, like that was a surprise. Like, I'm like, I don't even think even now, I don't think that we have done enough to get that award, but it was offered. I was very honored. It was a moment like nobody came with me that day, even when I was getting the award, like, like everyone was busy. I'm like, okay, I'll go by myself. Actually, two of my volunteers came who was with me from day one. And they said, oh, like we'll come. And I also didn't know how big this was. But, like the volunteers said, I'll come. And then it was nice too, because, like they are my initial volunteers and they were there. And I was able to talk about them too.
What are
Yeah,
their
I was
names?
honored. So it's Brinda, doctor. She is a psychiatrist now. And the other one is Kingston Yogendran, like who is working here now. So
Just wanted to give them a shout out. Okay, awesome.
oh yeah, sure.
Money can be hard to come by, but here's a $100 opportunity for you. Join my free newsletter for free exclusive content and a free chance to win $100 when I hold special draws. Did I mention that it's free? And then, we talked about like this success, and I'm sorry, I think I cut you off at the end, but we talked about your success here. But the other side of it is, I mean, you can call it failure, a learning lesson. What is, I guess, a learning lesson that you've experienced in the last 3 to 5 years? And like, what did you learn from that experience?
So I would say 3 to 5. I know 2 years is gone, right, with COVID. So like it's a little bit tougher thing. But for me, like I don't take anything as a failure. I always take it as an opportunity. I want to turn that around as an opportunity, right? Even just to talk about COVID, like like how we turned it as a virtual thing, and now even you and I talking now too, right? Like otherwise we would have met each other, maybe not. But the thing is, like I think everything, if we take it as an opportunity, and I don't see it as a failure, because even somebody criticize us, I would take it as a constructive criticism and see like where we can improve, right? And that I think that's one of my strengths, I would say, like like to take it as a positive thing and turn it around. Although if it's a failure, there are so many failures must have come to, like we apply for so many grants, and not that we get every single grant, but I would like to, I know the person who writes a grant, and Kingston, who writes a grant. So he's a director of communication now and grants writing too. But then he will be always like, oh my God, we didn't get this grant. I'm like, it's okay. Let's see why we didn't get it. So next time we'll improve on that and then we can work on it. Right. So, and that's my take on that one. And even walkathon too. We had a virtual walkathon and we didn't, we raised more money than actual, like, like when we do the in-person one the first year. So like there are always opportunities, right?
I love that approach because I also, considering I know that you talked about when you first started in the world of nonprofit, you can't be like, you have to ask for things, whether it's help, money, etc. And I think you mentioned that you did not like to do that. And I think it sounds like you've learned or evolved that it's part of what you need to do. And I like that. I think a lot of people are afraid of taking feedback. Like you said, that's something that I had to work on as well, which is, when someone gives you feedback, whether you agree or not, there's always some element of truth of something you can learn and
Mhm.
improve. Doesn't matter if they said it in a nice way or not, but there's something there.
Yeah, it bothers you. Like,
Yeah.
like it'll bother you for a while. Like, like as soon as you hear it, you're like, okay, like I know it's a criticism, but then, like, okay, so maybe there is something like I'm not doing it right. So, like, okay, how can I make it? And the next time when I see that person, I'm going to say, okay, I have done this. What do you think now? Right. So, and that person is also happy, or somebody had taken my advice or feedback, right, and doing it. Yeah, it's a way certain people say it in different ways. Yeah, of course, some people can be rude, some people can be nice about it, but like it's like we have to make it as like like for our own good. Like that's how I take it. Oh, they're telling me for my own good, they're not trying to put me down. If you think that way, I think we can we can survive one thing, and then we can also like come up in life.
Yeah, if you had a chance to go back in a time machine and visit 16-year-old Geetha, what would you tell her?
I would say be yourself, dream big, and go after your dreams.
And in terms of your personal legacy, like how would you want to be remembered by your friends and family?
Interesting. That's an interesting question. I would say a creative person with positive attitude who is willing to help and support if there's a need.
And that's a good way to segue into the final part of the podcast. It's a fun speed round that I like to call Creator Confessions. I'm going to basically tell you like statements, and you're going to give me a quick answer. Ready?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Favorite Tamil food?
Biryani,
Something that scares you?
dark, darkness.
Insecurity that you have?
Very hard to answer that question. Um,
Maybe you don't have
insecure.
one.
I don't know. I had to think about it, so I'm not too sure.
uh, Favorite TV show you're watching?
It can be Tamil shows or English shows or anything.
Anything. Yeah.
I watch all these dramas, some of the dramas. So I like the one Mauna Raham,
Somewhere you're itching to travel to?
New Zealand.
A fellow Tamil creator you want to give a shout out to?
I would say, like, I wouldn't say one person, but I want to say our families, the SAAAC families, the father or the mother who are actually taking care of their child.
Your favorite childhood memory?
Favorite childhood memories. There are so many memories, but these are tough questions, Like you should have told me these ones. I could have remembered that. Favorite childhood memories. I don't know. I guess performing. The
Okay.
dance performances, I love those ones. Those are my memories. Yeah.
Something you like to do for fun outside of work?
I like to walk on the beach or like sit up on a mountain and choreograph some dance.
Favorite movie of all time? It can be Tamil or English.
Oh, thinking. I would go with Titanic.
What's something that you've purchased in the last few years that you splurged on, but you have no regret about it?
Maybe the last 2 years is not a good question because it's COVID. I didn't go shopping. I'm scared to. Okay, let's see.
So like let's say the
No,
last 5 years. Yeah.
no, I'm not a shopping person too, to start with, and also like I'm very like like if I go shopping, I will just if I like something, I'll just buy it,
Got it.
right? And I don't regret about it after. So I don't think I don't know.
What's a pet peeve of yours?
Uh, I think the lateness. I'm a very punctual person. So
If you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, a regret that you would have?
I would say the SAAAC International.
Who's a person or celebrity whose life you'd want to experience for one day?
I was going to say Queen Elizabeth.
Well, I mean, you could say someone that's alive or just passed away, but yeah, you can say the Queen.
Mhm.
What's a decision you've been putting off for a while?
In life,
Yeah,
you mean?
yeah, just any decision that you.
Buying a new car.
What's a book you've read or a podcast you've listened to that's had an impact on you?
Okay, now I'm not good with names, remembering the names, but I think it was the last. Oh my goodness! Can you tell me something like last something like start with the last speech?
I don't.
I
I'm
think
also like you.
last speech. It's a book.
Okay. What's a belief, behavior, or habit that's improved your life?
Not to procrastinate.
And I think the book you were looking for is the last lecture.
That's right. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
And finally, what's a piece of advice that you would give to your fellow aspiring Tamil creators out there like yourself?
Same thing. Like like dream big, and go after your dreams.
Awesome. Well, I mean, Geetha, this is amazing. I think what you're doing is amazing. I think a lot of people would agree. So thank you for making time and sharing. For somebody listening to this that's inspired, maybe wants to volunteer or help with SAAAC in some way, or just reach out to you, what's the best way for someone to connect?
Oh, they can go to our website, saac.org, and there is something like how you would like to, like support, and they can go in there. Is the volunteering or donations or whatever it is, they can, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for jumping
Thank
on the
you.
podcast. And for those of you listening, I appreciate you guys as always, and look forward to the next episode.
Thank you.